bird bringing it into the house. She followed her dog into the woods, but the dog was still inside. It was late afternoon in rural Vermont, where dense forests stretched endlessly across rolling hills and quiet country roads wound their way through small towns. The air carried the crisp chill of early autumn, and golden sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Somewhere along one of these secluded roads stood a modest farmhouse belonging to Claire Bennett. Claire had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 years ago, finding solace in the companionship of her loyal dog, Max. A German Shepherd with intelligent eyes and an unwavering protective instinct, Max was more than just a pet, he was family. Together, they spent countless hours exploring the woods behind the house, a place Claire knew like the back of her hand. She had walked those trails so many times that she could navigate them even in the dark. But today felt different. Something about the atmosphere seemed heavier, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. It was 4:37 p.m. when Max suddenly bolted toward the tree line, his ears perked and tail stiff. Claire called after him, but he didn't stop. Instead, he disappeared into the underbrush, leaving her standing at the edge of the forest. "Max!" she shouted, her voice echoing faintly among the trees. "Come back!" There was no response. Only the rustling of leaves and the distant cawing of crows answered her. Sighing, Claire grabbed her coat and flashlight from the porch before stepping onto the narrow path that led into the woods. The light was beginning to fade, and she knew she couldn't leave Max out here overnight, not with predators roaming the area. The trail was familiar, yet something felt off. The usual sounds of birdsong and squirrels scampering through branches were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. Even the wind seemed reluctant to stir the leaves above her head. As Claire ventured deeper, she noticed subtle changes in her surroundings. The trees appeared closer together, their gnarled roots twisting unnaturally over the ground. Shadows pooled around her feet, darker and thicker than they should have been for this time of day. After several minutes of walking, she spotted movement ahead, a flash of fur darting between the trunks. "Max?" she called softly, quickening her pace. But when she reached the spot, there was nothing there. Just empty space and the oppressive weight of the forest pressing down on her. Her heart began to race as unease settled in her chest. She turned back toward the path, only to realize it wasn't where it should be. The trail had vanished, swallowed by the encroaching woods. Panic bubbled up inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Think, Claire," she muttered under her breath. "You've been here 100 times. You know your way home." She continued forward, hoping to find some landmark that would guide her back. But the deeper she went, the stranger things became. Trees grew impossibly tall, their branches intertwining to block out the sky. The air grew colder, sharp enough to sting her lungs with each breath. And then she heard it, the sound of paws crunching through leaves, followed by soft whining. Relief washed over her. "Max!" she cried, spinning around. "Where are you?" The whining grew louder, drawing her further into the forest. She followed it blindly, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Finally, she emerged into a small clearing bathed in pale moonlight. In the center stood Max, or at least what looked like Max. His fur shimmered unnaturally, almost translucent, and his eyes glowed faintly blue. Claire froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. "Max?" she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. The dog tilted its head, watching her silently. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the trees once more. "No!" Claire shouted, sprinting after it. "Wait!" But the harder she ran, the farther away it seemed to get. Her legs burned, and her breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed through thorny bushes and low-hanging branches. Finally, she stumbled into another clearing and stopped dead in her tracks. Standing before her was her own house, or rather, a perfect replica of it. Every detail was identical, down to the chipped paint on the front door and the flower pots lining the porch. But something was wrong. The windows were dark, and the air smelled stale, as though the building hadn't been touched in years. "This can't be real," Claire murmured, shaking her head. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the real house behind her. But the forest stretched endlessly in all directions, swallowing any sign of civilization. Summoning her courage, she approached the front door and pushed it open. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it earlier that day, the dishes still piled in the sink, the Afghan draped over the couch, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. Yet something felt hollow, as if the house itself were merely a shell. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no reply, just the heavy silence of an empty home. She wandered through the rooms, searching for answers. In the living room, she found Max curled up on his favorite blanket, fast asleep. Relief flooded through her, and she knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "Oh, Max," she whispered, "I thought I'd lost you." But as she touched him, her hand passed straight through. Gasping, she pulled back, staring at the dog in horror. He wasn't real. He was a ghost, or worse. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. Claire fumbled for her flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. A cold breeze swept through the house, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter. High-pitched and childlike, it sent shivers down her spine. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Show yourself!" The laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls until it surrounded her completely. Shadows moved across the ceiling, twisting and writhing like living things. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw movement, a figure standing in the doorway. It was a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, wearing a tattered dress and clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her hair hung in matted strands around her face, and her skin was deathly pale. What terrified Claire most, however, were her eyes. They were completely black, devoid of any humanity. "You shouldn't have come here," the girl said, her voice sweet yet chilling. "This isn't your world anymore." Claire backed away, her mind racing. "What do you mean? Where am I?" The girl smiled, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "You followed him, didn't you?" But he never left. Before Claire could respond, the floor beneath her feet gave way, sending her plummeting into darkness. She landed hard on damp earth, the impact knocking the wind out of her. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the forest, but everything was different. The trees were twisted and grotesque, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air reeked of decay, and the ground squelched beneath her boots. And there, standing a few feet away, was Max. Real this time. Alive. Whining softly as he stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. Claire scrambled to her feet and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Oh God, Max," she sobbed, "we need to get out of here." But as she turned to leave, she realized the path was gone again. Behind her, the girl's laughter echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing second, expanding the story to reach 20 characters. Deepening Claire's backstory. Claire wasn't always the strong, independent woman she appeared to be. Beneath her composed exterior lay a deep well of grief and guilt. Her husband, Michael, had died in a car accident caused by icy road conditions, a tragedy she blamed herself for, as she had urged him to drive despite the weather warnings. Since then, she had poured all her love and attention into Max, using him as a shield against loneliness and despair. Her attachment to the woods stemmed from memories of hiking trips she and Michael used to take together. After his death, she sought comfort in the familiarity of the trails, believing it kept her connected to him. But now, the woods had become a prison, trapping her in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Detailed description of the forest. The forest surrounding Claire's home was vast and ancient, rumored to be haunted by spirits of those who had wandered too far and never returned. Locals spoke of strange occurrences, disappearing hikers, unexplained noises, and sightings of shadowy figures lurking among the trees. Some believed the woods were cursed, while others claimed they served as a gateway to another realm. As Claire ventured deeper, the environment shifted subtly but noticeably. The trees grew taller and closer together, their bark slick with moisture. Mushrooms sprouted in clusters, glowing faintly in the dim light. Streams of water snaked through the underbrush, their surfaces rippling unnaturally despite the lack of wind. And everywhere she looked, she saw glimpses of movement shapes darting just beyond the edge of her vision. exploring the ghostly girl. The little girl embodied the malevolent force haunting the woods. Through fragmented flashbacks experienced by Claire, we learned that she had once lived in the farmhouse decades ago. Tragedy struck when she wandered into the woods one night and vanished, presumed dead. Her spirit remained tethered to the forest, luring unsuspecting victims into her domain and trapping them forever. Her interactions with Claire grew increasingly menacing, culminating in psychological torment designed to break her spirit. She taunted Claire with visions of Michael, forcing her to relive the night of the accident over and over again. Each encounter left Claire weaker, both physically and emotionally, until she questioned whether she was truly alive or merely a prisoner of the girl's twisted game. Investigative elements and historical lore. Desperate for answers, Claire visited the local library the next morning, poring over old records and newspaper clippings. She discovered accounts of similar disappearances dating back centuries, all linked to the same stretch of forest. One article mentioned a Native American legend about a shadow realm hidden within the woods, accessible only to those who stray too far from the marked paths. She also spoke with Mrs. Hargrove, an elderly neighbor who had lived in the area her entire life. "That forest has a way of claiming people," Mrs. Hargrove warned. "Once you step inside, you might not come back the same if you come back at all." These revelations added layers of mystery and dread, grounding the supernatural elements in a tangible historical context. Extended resolution and ambiguous ending. In the end, Claire managed to escape the woods, but not without cost. Max refused to leave her side, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. He growled at shadows that weren't there and barked at empty corners of the house. Claire tried to convince herself it was just stress, but deep down, she knew better. One night, as she lay awake in bed, she heard the faint sound of paws padding across the floor. She turned on the lamp, expecting to see Max curled up at the foot of the bed, but the room was empty. And then, from the hallway, came the unmistakable sound of laughter, the same high-pitched giggle that had haunted her dreams. Was she truly free? Or had the forest simply let her go, knowing she would carry its curse with her wherever she went? He got a voicemail from himself, dated 2 weeks in the future. It was late evening in suburban Portland, Oregon, a city known for its lush greenery and perpetual rain. The sky was overcast, as usual, with heavy clouds pressing down on the quiet neighborhood where Nathan Carter lived. His modest 2-story home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac surrounded by tall pine trees that swayed gently in the cool breeze. Inside, the house was dimly lit, save for the soft glow of a desk lamp in the study where Nathan had been working. Nathan was a freelance graphic designer who often found himself burning the midnight oil to meet deadlines. Tonight, however, he wasn't focused on work. Instead, he was scrolling through his phone, checking messages and emails before turning in for the night. It was 10:23 p.m. when his phone buzzed unexpectedly. A voicemail notification appeared on the screen, but something about it immediately caught his attention. It was from his own number. Confused, Nathan tapped the notification and listened to the message. At first, all he heard was static, faint and crackling, like an old radio tuning into a distant station. Then a voice emerged, his voice, but distorted, raspy, and filled with urgency. "Nathan," it began, pausing as if struggling to form words, "you need to listen carefully. This is you calling from 2 weeks ahead. You don't have much time." Nathan pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it in disbelief. He checked the timestamp on the voicemail. It was dated exactly 14 days in the future. His heart raced as he replayed the message, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "This can't be real," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "It's got to be some kind of prank." But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The voice sounded desperate, almost pleading, and the warning it delivered sent chills down his spine. Determined to dismiss it as a technical glitch or a joke played by one of his friends, Nathan set the phone aside and tried to focus on finishing up his work. Yet, as the hours passed, the message gnawed at him. He replayed it several times, each listen revealing new details. In the background, faint whispers echoed, barely audible but unmistakably human. They seemed to repeat the same phrase over and over again. Don't open the door. By midnight, Nathan's curiosity had turned into unease. He decided to call his best friend, Mark, hoping for some reassurance. Mark picked up after a few rings, his voice groggy with sleep. "Hey man," Mark said, stifling a yawn. "What's up?" "I just got the weirdest voicemail," Nathan replied, his tone hesitant. "It's from my own number, dated 2 weeks in the future." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Wait, what? That's not possible." "I know," Nathan said quickly. "I thought it was a prank too, but the message feels off, like it's warning me about something." Mark sighed, clearly skeptical. "Maybe your phone's messed up, or someone hacked your account. Have you tried resetting it?" "No, I haven't," Nathan admitted. "But there's more. The voice says I'm calling myself from the future, and then there's this weird whispering in the background." "Look, Nate," Mark interrupted, his tone firmer now. "Get some sleep. You've been working too hard lately. If it's still bothering you tomorrow, let me know, and we'll figure it out together." Reluctantly, Nathan agreed and hung up. But sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of the message replayed in his mind. The warnings, the whispers, the sheer impossibility of it all kept him awake, pacing the length of his living room. As dawn approached, Nathan finally drifted off into a restless slumber. When he woke later that morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, momentarily banishing the unease that had plagued him throughout the night. He convinced himself that the voicemail had been nothing more than a bizarre glitch, or perhaps a prank, orchestrated by one of his tech-savvy colleagues. Still, he couldn't bring himself to delete the message. Something about it felt important, as though ignoring it might lead to consequences he couldn't yet comprehend. They checked into a motel, but their room had been closed for years. It was late afternoon in rural Kentucky, where rolling hills and dense forests framed the landscape. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the winding roads that connected small towns to forgotten stretches of countryside. Somewhere along one of these desolate highways stood an old motel, a relic of a bygone era, its neon sign flickering faintly with the words